tax levels, eminent domain, when it comes to government spending, when it comes to
what about how about defense?
Defense, defense is always going to be the issue where libertarians really go
immigration.
nuts.
I think drug legalization, things like that, they tend to be. It's more problematic, and I'm not saying it's these are insuperable differences by any stretch, because you're right that the basis of free enterprise, of private property, of a sphere of activity that the government has no right to tell you whether it's religion or whether it's drug taking or who you're sleeping with or whatever.
And let me jump in here. There's a difference. I know some social conservatives who believe in all the things that we just talked about. They're against gay marriage, they're against drugs, they're for the traditional family values. They don't want to see this stuff on television. They hate pornography. And the way they want to change it is at the church level, through social pressure, through societal norms, and that's the way to handle it.
No, that's great.
And when you have a social conservative who says, these are the things we want, and you know how we're going to do it? By rule of law. We're going to force, if we can get 51%, we're going to force the other 49 that way. Then we're not believing in liberty. They are against their own morals that way. But when I find a social conservative who says, I'm going to convince you, I'm not going to compel you, I'm going to convince you,
that's the beginning. Yeah, that's the beginning of an interesting conversation, I think.
Well, it's the way it should be. And I might even join him in convincing you. Yeah, you shouldn't let your kids watch this. You shouldn't be doing these drugs. You shouldn't be doing all these things. That's what a church is for. That's what a society is for. It's not what a government's for.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
How do we get these two sides working together then?
Well, I think they are in large part, though.
Only because we've got an enemy in common right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is the real question: is let's assume, and I think we're right, that there's a huge amount of overlap. How do we explain what happened for the first 6 years at least of the Bush administration, where you had a self-regarded conservative who was supported by conservatives and many libertarians, and he blew out the federal budget, and he also acted promiscuously in terms of foreign policy. And I was against the Iraq War, certainly, but even people who were in favor of that will admit that it was very poorly planned, et cetera. So what did we do wrong that we had a Republican government, that we, both small government conservatives and libertarians had no effect on their policy? Well,
let's go back to what is now known as Caldara's political axiom number 1. There is nothing Republicans cannot F up. You see, the FCC won't even let me say the right word. There's nothing we can't screw up. Because of that, we were under this mistaken fantasy that somehow Republicans weren't politicians. And once they got into power, once the Takings Coalition surrounded them, they fell down just like everybody else.
Are the conservatives that you're friendly with, are they strong on the idea of reforming Social Security or getting rid of it, or Medicare and whatnot? Because this is the other thing that is worrying me. The real battleground, I think, for the future of the country is, it has to do with unspending deficits, et cetera. And one of the things that was very disturbing is during this healthcare debate, which, people keep saying Obama's going to socialize 1/6 of the economy. It's actually 1/12, because the government is already spending half of all healthcare. But the Republicans started to say, their main line of attack was, he's going to screw with your Medicare, as opposed to saying, like, that almost is a reason to vote for it, as far as I'm concerned, because Medicare is a disaster. It's a time bomb that is far worse than anything else.
Your larger question, though, is what happened to us? What happened to conservatives? The conservatives end up doing this. They get excited about a personality. They put that personality into power, and then they turn back and do ridiculous things like go back to work, raise their kids, try to earn a living, pay their taxes. Whereas the left is on the ball all the time. That's why they have academia. That's why they have the SEIU and unions that work for government. They're on top of this. The lesson is, and the good part about the Tea Party year is that I think we're starting to understand we don't trust politicians. R, D, unaffiliated, we don't care. We don't care what they say any longer. The price is going to be ever vigilance, and that's a good thing. And so when and if Republicans get back into office, I think there's a better chance they're going to act like Republicans. The scary thing was when Bush was in office, federal government grew at a faster rate than when LBJ was president.
I happen to know that very well as I crunched some of those numbers, and it's disturbing. And then also in terms of regulation and whatnot. And hopefully,
it's a whatnot that always gets you.
Yeah, well, hopefully, the Republicans for at least 2 months will be pretty good, and then then they need to be, visited by guys with baseball bats on a regular basis.
But those guys with baseball bats have to be us. It has to be the Tea Party guys. It has to be the crazy loons fringe who are willing to actually take a little time away from their job, a little time away from their family.
Yeah, we may be getting there because one of the things that's fascinating about the Tea Party, and I find, generally speaking, I covered the 9/12 rally in D.C. I was there. We did a nice video about that, and it was genuinely interesting. Good bunch of people. There are some elements of it that I find, somewhat distasteful or dubious. I mean, when you see people saying, carrying signs saying, "Keep the government out of my Medicare," there's like work to be done here.
There's some intellectual disconnect there.
But it's also true that there hasn't been anything like that. And I don't think in our lifetimes. I mean, even the anti-war movement was not quite this kind of broad-based and.
It was all racism. Yeah. It was all racism.
And so that it may be, I mean, one of the things, if you think about societies like individuals as having learning curves, and we're coming out of a post-war era where you could get away with a kind of big government mentality. That well is run dry, and I think we are at a hinge point where people recognize this. One of the things that's most fascinating to me is that when we write stuff or we do stuff about the relative pay of public sector workers versus private sector, total compensation, and we all know, and even Willie Brown, the former head of the California State Assembly, said this, the old bargain used to be you would go into public service, you wouldn't get paid, you wouldn't be paid very well, you wouldn't have much status, but you'd have job security and pretty good benefits. Now it's reversed, where it's like, no, you go into the public sector, you get great benefits, you get paid more than your private sector counterparts, and then you get to tax these people to pay for gold-plated benefits that you can start picking up at 55. People are livid over that, and that bargain is ending. And that's a good thing.
The difference is when that happens in the private sector, the business goes under.
Right.
So if you work for United Airlines, you've seen your pensions get cut in half. Right. Even if you were a retiree, your pensions were cut in half. Is that going to be able to happen with government workers and Medicare and Social Security?
I mean, it is going to have to. If you look at any municipality in the country, basically because of the stock market crash and whatnot, they are on the hook for money to pensions that they absolutely can't. They won't be able to come up with. California is probably bankrupt. There will be other states that follow, and something will have to change. And at some point, I think, this is that social learning curve. We're going to learn, okay, you can't keep increasing the number of public sector workers and paying them 5, 7, 10% annual increases with benefits that are golden, that they don't even have to invest in. That day is over. And I think we're learning that, and we're learning that similar kind of false ideas are throughout other parts of the economy. If we can't walk away from the current fiscal crisis, and I'm not saying we are, but and realize that it's not a good idea for the government to always promote home ownership in every circumstance, then we're screwed as a country. But I actually think we're getting
less than a minute left here. Put a cap on this for me. Conservatives, libertarians.
Do you want a cap, like a BP oil cap?
Yeah, BP oil cap, something leaky.
Okay.
Yeah, something exactly like that. Will we be able to find some common ground?
Yeah, I think so. And here's the actual reason is because I think conservatives are getting wiser, where they realize they are not going to achieve the results through brute force. The social cons realize they've tried that and it doesn't work. People are too different. People want to be individuals. And I think what we will see is actually conservatives moving to the libertarian side.
And more importantly, libertarians have more fun.
I think so.
I agree. Nick Gillespie, thank you. Check it out on reason.tv. Reason.tv. There you have it. Listen for me late nights on 850 KOE, and we'll see you next week.